the midst of World War I on April 24, 1915, began what the Armenians call Medz Yegren, the Great Crime. That day, the Ottoman government put its plan to expel Armenians living in the Ottoman Empire into action. For years, Armenians in the territory, which constitutes the present-day Republic of Turkey, have been sent on death marches and murdered. The total number of people killed during that time has been estimated at up to 1.5 million. 100 years later, there is still great controversy over whether or not the word genocide can be used to describe the killings. While Turkey maintains that what happened back then was simply the result of a messy war, 23 countries and the Pope himself have already officially recognized the Armenian genocide.
Genocidio del XX secolo.
A heavy past that has gotten much more international attention this month after American reality star of Armenian origin Kim Kardashian and her husband, the rapper Kanye West, visited the country and enjoyed red carpet treatment during their stay. Our focus this week is on Armenia. Welcome to our focus on Armenia, where in Yerevan, the capital, the centennial of the Armenian Genocide will be marked this week. One of the world's leading scholars in this field is Professor Richard Hovhannissian of UCLA. 40 years ago, together with his students, he created an oral history project, which consists of interviews with more than 800 survivors of the 1915 atrocity. Let's hear a bit more about this project. Professor, what was the most remarkable thing for you in this project?
Well, oral history is very important because they're first-person accounts of what individuals have gone through. Sometimes when we talk about genocide, we don't see faces, we just have numbers and statistics, and it's quite impersonal. But when we get individual stories, one by one, you feel the depth of the intensity of the experience, the continuing trauma, the differences of experiences and the similarities of experiences.
And Professor, you're probably also very familiar with the Turkish narrative. What are the most controversial points when we come to compare between this one and the Armenian one?
The Turkish narrative is primarily, they emphasize that it was a civil strife, civil war, and that there was no intended genocide. They originally absolutely denied anything had ever happened, and then that didn't work because there was too much memory still around. And the more recent approach is that they put it into a rationalizing that there was really no intent, it was a matter of security. We simply had to relocate the Armenian population from endangered zones, and that yes, some Armenians did die because of the climatic conditions, because of lack of provisions, because of some poor planning, and because of Kurdish tribes who attacked them, but the central government was not responsible.
And according to your research, was this genocide or ethnic cleansing a part of a certain political ideology, or was it what we call today Islamic jihad?
No. It was not jihad. It was definitely a political ideology in which they exploit religious sentiment among populations. It's not difficult for dictatorial political regimes to use religion rather than religion being the cause for it. It was a modern ideology of Turkism to reshape and remodel what had been a multicultural, multi-ethnic empire that was known as the Ottoman Empire, and in its place to create a Turkish empire that would be homogeneous based on one people, one language, one culture, one religion. It was a xenophobic, fear of the other, nationalist ideology that drove this, and matches the Nazi ideology in World War II. If the Armenians had been Muslims, perhaps they would not have been massacred. But under the circumstances, it was not religion, but a political ideology that drove the genocide.
Professor, thank you so much for this. Armenia is apparently the second most religious country in the world. This, according to a new Win Gallup International survey, which questioned nearly 64,000 people in 65 countries. By the way, if you're very curious, I will let you know that the most religious country was Thailand, where 94% of respondents said they were a religious person. Now let's hear a bit more about the status of religion in Armenia from Archbishop Aris, the Director of Foreign Relations for the Armenian Patriarchate of Jerusalem. He's now joining us. Hello, thank you so much for being with us today.
Welcome, welcome.
So why do you think that Armenia came in second in this survey?
Well, the country has been now free from the Soviet domination since 1991. As you know, prior to 91, officially the country was atheist, since the communists were atheists. But with the independence of Armenia, the church also gained its independence and freedom, and therefore people that were suppressed during the communist regime, now they came into the open and they flocked the church. They were rebaptized or baptized, and thus I would say that 95% of the Armenians in Armenia are really Christian today.
And in what way is the Armenian church involved in the everyday lives of the citizens in Armenia, and to what extent is there a separation between state and church there?
Well, the church and the state are not completely separate in Armenia. The state has recognized the Armenian church as the mother church, and therefore the state has granted privileges to the Armenian church to conduct its daily life in preaching Christianity and keeping the spiritual life alive.
And Pope Francis recently risked Turkish anger by using the word genocide when he referred to the 1915 Armenian atrocity. How important was it to you?
It was indeed a great giant step forward towards the recognition of the Armenian genocide by the courageous Pope Francis I to acknowledge it as the first genocide of the 20th century. So this was a tremendous achievement for justice by hearing the Pope come openly in favor of recognizing the first genocide of the 20th century. And this is what irked President Erdogan of Turkey to immediately recall its ambassador.
Archbishop Aris, thank you so much for being with us today.
Welcome, and thank you.
And now what else is going on in Armenia?
The U.S. has decided to cut some of the funding they have been providing to Armenia. The U.S. ambassador to Armenia last week met with Armenia's prime minister and said the decrease in funding was not related to the effectiveness of U.S. programs in Armenia, nor to U.S. relations with Armenia, but rather budgetary constraints stemming from Washington. In honor of the 100th anniversary of the Armenian massacre in Ottoman Turkey, a Hollywood film is being released. The film, 1915, in theaters on April 17th, is a psychological thriller, is directed by Armenians, and features an Armenian and American cast. The movie was produced in partnership with the Armenian Center for National and International Studies. Armenian gold exports are on the rise. Armenia exported a record of 3.6 tons of gold dust in 2014 with a customs value of $82 million. Figures from Armenia's customs service show that gold exports took off in 2009, when nearly 2,000 tons were shipped as compared to 250 kilograms in 2008. Armenian-American reality TV star Kim Kardashian and her husband, rapper Kanye West, visited Armenia last week, where they attracted international media attention as well as special treatment from government officials in the country. West also performed a free concert in the city of Yerevan, which was cut short after he jumped into a pond and was mobbed by eager fans. National Library Week was held in Armenia last week. The objective of the event, organized by the Library Association of Armenia, is to highlight the importance of libraries, books, reading, and knowledge, and promote interest in them. The National Library Week is an annual event held in all libraries across the country.
Atom Egoyan is an Armenian stage director and film director who grew up in Canada. He has been nominated for 2 Academy Awards. His movies, often controversial, are famous for their use of technology and how it can sometimes distance people. Egoyan tackled the subject of the Armenian Genocide in his 2002 movie Ararat, which was met by threats and complaints from pro-Turkish protesters, and is now joining us. Now, Adam, before we talk about your work, I want to ask you, you grew up in Canada. Were you always so connected to your Armenian background?
No, I wasn't. I was born in Egypt, moved to Canada at the age of 2. So I wasn't really raised in the community. I knew about the history, but in a very anecdotal way. It wasn't until I came to the University of Toronto at the age of 18 that I became involved with the Student Association. I became much more aware of the specific nature of the history and the politics of that history.
And your film Ararat from 2002, which starred Charles Aznavour, was one of the first ones to directly deal with the Armenian Genocide. What made you want to turn this into a motion film?
Yeah, I mean, what really made me want to bring the issue was an invitation from my longtime producer, Robert Lantosh, who made this incredible pronouncement at the Armenian Community Center. He was asked to introduce me for an award I was getting from my community, and he said it in front of all of these people that as a Hungarian Jew, he had seen so many films dealing with Holocaust, and that if I was prepared to make a film about the Armenian Genocide, he would support it. At which point everyone in this community hall rose to their feet and started cheering, and I went, oh my God, what am I going to do? I mean, I didn't really know, I wasn't expecting this invitation. But suddenly, as I started looking at it, I realized that the film I wanted to make was not so much about the history itself, but the way that the violence and the trauma of the Armenian Genocide has rippled through 4 generations. So it's not really a classic historic film. It's a film that's it's actually told in the present day, even though it's looking at events 100 years ago.
And this fall, we are expecting the release of your film, Remember, which revolves around the Jewish Holocaust. Tell us a bit about this.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really excited about this movie because it's also, it occurred to me as we were shooting it that it's actually the last story you can tell about Holocaust in the present day. You know, in some ways it's about a survivor who is suffering from early stages dementia, played by Christopher Plummer, who thinks he's found the people or the person responsible for killing his family in Auschwitz and goes on this mission to track this person down, to assassinate him, in fact, but keeps forgetting why, because of his dementia. And it's really about this idea of how to deal with this search for justice at the end of one's life. So we have an incredible cast. We have Martin Landau, we have Bruno Ganz, we have like these amazing actors who are playing this generation, which is really the last generation that are still living with us.
Mm-hmm. Sounds great, very interesting. We will follow for sure. Thank you so much for being with us, Adam.
Thank you.
The total number of Armenians in Israel is estimated to be about 7,000. Around 1,500 of them live in the Armenian Quarter in Jerusalem, and most of them hold Jordanian citizenship and don't have an Israeli one. Our next guest, Aram Hagyun, is an Armenian musician and writer from Jerusalem. He also writes very interesting columns on the Armenian Weekly website and is now joining us from Jerusalem. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
So, Apo, 100 years after the Armenian Genocide, how can you explain the fact that young Armenian adults like yourself, who might even live outside the Armenian territory, still feel so connected to this Armenian heritage and to this event and narrative?
I believe that it has to do with the survival of our people, that we survived almost an extinction, an annihilation, and that we survived it, and that obliges us to sustain and to maintain and to take forward our identity and our heritage and our history.
And Apo, you recently published an article under the headline, "No, I'm not Anatolian." Can you explain what lies behind these words?
The article's main emphasis was that we should oppose the Turkish linguistic claim on the land that we still claim that we are indigenous, that we are part of that land. And by calling the land Anatolia, I thought that it gave the Turks a lot of linguistic claim and thus a bigger claim to it. And I just wanted to pose that in a more intellectual way.
And Apple, what can you tell us about life in Jerusalem as part of a minority?
Being part of the city, it does give you an insight to the world and to the region and to your own self too, and to your own community. And I think it has helped me as an Armenian when I look at other issues around the world. I think you learn a lot by being here as an Armenian.
Interesting. Apo, thank you so much for all your insights.
Thank you for having me.
All right. And thank you all for being with us today on another episode of Focus. Be sure to follow us as well next week because another very interesting country is coming up. See you soon.